Imagine yourself settling into the quiet atmosphere of a winter evening. The air outside is cold, sharp, and still, while inside the great machinery of one of America's busiest airports hums with its usual rhythm. Chicago's O'Hare International, a place where millions of travelers pass through each year, has always been associated with movement, departures, arrivals, the endless rush of flights that carve through the sky. On November evenings, the lights of the runways shimmer like constellations laid out across the ground. Aircraft line up in steady procession, their engines low and steady, while terminal windows glow softly against the fading daylight. For those watching, the ordinary details of the scene feel almost hypnotic. The flashing beacons of planes, the taxiway lights stretching like rivers, the muffled announcements echoing through the concourse. It is a place of precision, of routine, of schedules kept with near military efficiency. Yet every ordinary landscape contains the possibility of something extraordinary, and this is where the story begins to shift. On a particular afternoon in November 2006, a number of workers and travelers at O'Hare began to notice something in the sky that did not belong there. Hovering silently, it did not move like a plane, nor did it resemble a balloon or helicopter. There was no sound of engines, no navigational lights, and no clear explanation. Above one of the busiest and most carefully monitored pieces of airspace in the country, an object appeared and remained suspended. Its form seemed disc-like, metallic, and unmistakably out of place against the dull gray clouds of Chicago's winter. The mystery of that day has endured because of the context in which it unfolded. Airports are centers of order, tightly regulated environments where every movement of aircraft is logged, tracked, and accounted for. For something unknown to appear in such a location is not only unsettling, it is disruptive to the very fabric of aviation's controlled world. Those who saw it did not immediately run to tell the press. Instead, they whispered among colleagues, hesitated, wondered whether their eyes had deceived them. But the object remained long enough to convince more than a handful of witnesses that something unexplainable was truly there. This story, while it contains all the elements of mystery, is not the stuff of rumor or imagination alone. It is based on testimonies collected from people whose jobs depend on their ability to see and identify objects in the sky with precision. These are not casual dreamers. They are mechanics, pilots, and ground crew, professionals trained to separate fact from illusion. That is what gives the O'Hare incident a weight different from many other stories of unidentified flying objects. It is not only that something was seen, but that it was seen by those most qualified to know what should and should not be in the air, above one of the busiest airports in the world. And so, as we step into this story, the tone is not one of alarm or sensationalism, but of quiet curiosity. Like a traveler waiting in the terminal, we watch the skies with patience, with calm awareness, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary things appear not in the deserts of secrecy, nor the deep woods of folklore, but in the heart of our most ordinary and well-lit places. Above the noise of jet engines and the blur of travel, a silent question drifted into view one winter afternoon in Chicago, and its echo remains with us still. November 7th, 2006 was a day that began like any other at O'Hare International Airport. The skies over Chicago were cloaked in a familiar sheet of gray, the kind of heavy cloud cover that often settles in the Midwest during late autumn. A chilly breeze swept across the runways, the air sharp enough to remind every worker outside that winter was only weeks away. Inside the terminals, however, there was warmth and routine. Passengers shuffled toward their gates, luggage wheels rattling on the tile floors, voices blending into the steady background noise of boarding calls and announcements. For the employees of United Airlines, it was another ordinary day, flights arriving, flights departing, schedules maintained with the clockwork precision that keeps the aviation world running smoothly. The focus of activity that afternoon was Gate 17, a busy spot along Concourse C, where flights to destinations across the country and the world departed in steady succession. Mechanics and ground crew worked in their usual rhythm, guiding planes in, assisting with luggage, and coordinating with pilots preparing for takeoff. But as the afternoon unfolded, something unusual caught the attention of several employees. At first, it was just a murmur, someone pointing upward, squinting into the low ceiling of clouds. There, hovering above the terminal, was an object that defied every expectation of what belonged in the sky. Witnesses described it as a disc-shaped craft, metallic and solid, not shimmering like a trick of light, or blurred like a passing bird. It hovered with an eerie stillness, without the sway or drift of a balloon, and without the noise of engines that normally accompany aircraft. The lack of sound was perhaps the most unnerving detail for many who saw it. Airports are noisy places, roaring engines, taxiing planes, constant motion, but this object made no contribution to that orchestra. It was simply there, still and silent, like an intruder that did not belong. Reports suggest that the sighting lasted several minutes, long enough for multiple employees to step outside, confirm what their colleagues were pointing at, and exchange uneasy glances. Some described the craft as being so clear and defined that it was unmistakable, while others hesitated, worried about how such claims would be received. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the object made its exit. Without banking or turning, without descending toward the ground, it shot vertically upward, straight into the thick cloud cover. The clouds themselves seemed to react. Eyewitnesses recalled the way it left behind a distinct opening, as though the object had punched a hole through the gray layer above. That detail, the perfect circle left behind in the clouds, was repeated in multiple accounts, and became one of the most compelling features of the sighting. For those present, the event was brief but deeply unsettling. Airports are zones of strict monitoring, where radar towers and personnel constantly track every movement in the sky. To see something so unaccounted for hovering above one of the busiest hubs in the world was not just strange, it felt impossible. Yet it had happened, and dozens of employees now carried the memory of it. For many, it would become a story they whispered about with trusted colleagues, but hesitated to put into writing. The fear of ridicule was strong, and the culture around UFO sightings often discouraged open reporting. Still, the strangeness of November 7th lingered. Later, when journalists and investigators pieced the accounts together, they found not just a handful of unreliable claims, but a collection of consistent testimonies describing the same craft, in the same location, at the same time. For now, however, in the immediate aftermath, the sighting was simply one more mystery unfolding above an airport that had seen countless flights, but never anything quite like this. It was the beginning of a case that would grow into one of the most credible UFO stories of the 21st century. The strength of the O'Hare incident lies not only in the strange object itself, but in the people who saw it. In the world of UFO reports, credibility often depends on who is doing the witnessing. At O'Hare, it was not random onlookers or curious stargazers, but trained aviation professionals, pilots, mechanics, ground crew, and even some passengers who came forward. These were men and women accustomed to identifying aircraft quickly and accurately, people who spent their lives working beneath the skies and who understood the normal patterns of aviation. For them, seeing something that did not fit was not a casual curiosity, it was a startling break in the familiar. Among the most widely cited accounts were those of United Airlines employees. Several mechanics reported seeing the disk above Gate C-17. One described it as a perfect metallic disk, smooth and silent, suspended in the gray air. Another remembered the way the object seemed to blend with the clouds yet remained distinctly solid, as though it had mass and presence, not just a reflection or illusion. Pilots preparing their aircraft for departure also noticed the object, and one was said to have radioed about it, though official logs later failed to preserve such reports. The consistency across these accounts, that it was disc-shaped, hovering without sound, and that it punched a hole in the clouds when it departed, made it difficult to dismiss the incident as mere imagination. The psychology of the witnesses adds another layer of intrigue. Most of those who saw the object were reluctant to speak publicly at first. Aviation is a field where reputation matters, and where safety and professionalism leave little room for stories of the unexplained. To admit seeing a UFO risked mockery, disciplinary consequences, or being dismissed as unreliable. Many employees reportedly only spoke of the event in private, whispering among trusted colleagues, rather than filing official reports. The few who did eventually talk to journalists did so under conditions of anonymity, unwilling to have their names tied to something so controversial. This silence is telling, not because it suggests the event was false, but because it highlights the fear of stigma surrounding UFO sightings, even among highly credible observers. One of the most striking details repeated in multiple testimonies was the way the object departed. Eyewitnesses said it did not glide away or vanish gradually, but instead shot upward in an instant, creating what looked like a circular hole in the dense clouds above. This image, described as though the craft had literally torn through the sky, stayed with the witnesses long after. It is the kind of physical detail that gives weight to their accounts, something concrete that multiple people could describe independently of one another. Skeptics might argue about reflections, balloons, or weather effects, but the description of a sudden vertical launch and a gaping hole in the clouds does not fit neatly with such explanations. What makes this section of the story particularly powerful is the sense of shared experience. One or two witnesses might be doubted, but when a group of aviation employees, people whose jobs require careful observation, describe the same event in near identical terms, the mystery deepens. The human element of the O'Hare sighting is not just about what was seen, but about the hesitation, the quiet conversations, and the way the event pressed against the boundaries of what professionals dared to acknowledge. In the stillness above the terminal that day, dozens of people looked up and shared a moment of wonder and unease, a moment they would carry quietly with them long after the disk had vanished into the clouds. To understand why the O'Hare sighting carried such weight, it helps to step back and place it within the long history of unidentified aerial phenomena near airports and aviation hubs. Airports have always been locations of heightened awareness, crowded with radar systems, air traffic controllers, and trained eyes scanning the skies. When something unusual appears in such a controlled environment, it does more than puzzle, it challenges the very systems designed to ensure that everything in the sky is accounted for. The O'Hare incident in 2006 was not the first time such an event had unfolded, nor was it the first time officials found themselves confronted with questions they would rather avoid. As early as the late 1940s, during the dawn of the Cold War, UFO sightings became entangled with aviation security. The United States Air Force launched Project Sign, later Project Grudge, and most famously Project Blue Book, to investigate the flood of reports from pilots and civilians alike. In those years, major airports were not immune. In 1952, the skies above Washington, D.C., became the stage for one of the most famous UFO incidents in American history, when radar operators at National Airport detected objects that outmaneuvered military jets sent to intercept them. The event caused such a stir that it reached the front pages of national newspapers, prompting President Truman himself to demand answers. The lesson officials drew was clear. Unexplained objects near airports were not only matters of curiosity, but potential threats to national security. Over the decades that followed, other airports reported their own anomalies, radar blips that appeared and vanished without explanation, pilots reporting unidentified lights that seemed to shadow their planes, controllers noting movements that didn't match any known aircraft. Most of these reports were quickly filed away or explained as weather phenomena, but they contributed to a growing body of evidence that airports, with their constant monitoring, were natural stages for such mysteries to reveal themselves. The O'Hare incident fit into this pattern, but with a crucial twist. It occurred in the 21st century, long after the Air Force had officially ended its UFO investigations, at a time when the cultural climate was more skeptical, and the official stance was to downplay rather than investigate. Chicago's O'Hare in particular was a location of significance. By 2006, it was the second busiest airport in the United States, handling nearly 77 million passengers that year alone. It was not some remote airstrip, nor a rural town where sightings might be dismissed as folklore. It was the beating heart of America's aviation system, monitored constantly and staffed by professionals. That something so unusual could appear there, above Gate C-17, without immediate official recognition, was both baffling and unsettling. Unlike sightings in isolated places, which could be brushed off as mistakes or misperceptions, this one occurred at a place where the eyes of the aviation world were always alert. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and other authorities had long maintained a cautious posture towards such events. Safety was their first concern, and the public's trust in air travel was paramount. To acknowledge the possibility of unidentified craft lingering over runways risked stirring anxiety among travelers and raising questions about security. For this reason, many historical sightings had been quietly attributed to atmospheric quirks or dismissed without serious inquiry. When the O'Hare incident occurred, it followed this well-worn path. Officials moved quickly to frame it as a weather anomaly, echoing decades of similar responses. Yet the consistency of eyewitness reports placed it firmly within the broader history of UFO encounters, tied to aviation, linking it with the unresolved puzzles of earlier eras. By placing O'Hare's 2006 sighting into this lineage, the event becomes more than a strange afternoon in Chicago. It becomes part of a chain, stretching back through the Cold War, through Project Blue Book, through radar operators, watching mysterious blips in the night sky. It reminds us that the skies above our airports, the very spaces we trust to be controlled and predictable, have long been arenas for mystery. The O'Hare case was modern, yes, but it echoed the past with uncanny precision, as though the history of unexplained aerial phenomena was continuing its story in the most ordinary yet extraordinary of places. When the strange object disappeared into the clouds above O'Hare on that cold November afternoon, the witnesses were left with a choice: remain silent, or share what they had seen. For many of them, silence seemed the safer option. In aviation culture, reputation is everything, and reports of flying saucers risked being met with laughter, disbelief, or disciplinary action. Yet, as days passed, the whispers grew. Mechanics confided in colleagues, pilots discussed the event in hushed tones, and soon enough, the story began to move beyond the walls of the terminal. What had started as a quiet mystery among airport staff slowly gathered momentum, reaching journalists who sensed that something unusual had unfolded at one of the busiest airports in the country. The first major breakthrough came in early January 2007, when the Chicago Tribune published a detailed article about the sighting. Reporter John Hilkovich, known for his careful and respected coverage of aviation, interviewed multiple United Airlines employees who described what they had seen. The piece was striking not because it sensationalized the story, but because it treated it with seriousness. It confirmed that at least a dozen credible witnesses had seen a disc-shaped craft hovering over Gate C-17, before shooting vertically through the clouds. Once the story appeared in print, it spread quickly across national and even international media. What had been a local secret now became one of the most widely discussed UFO sightings of the new century. The Federal Aviation Administration, however, responded with dismissal. Officials stated that there had been no radar confirmation of the object, and no formal reports submitted by controllers or pilots. They attributed the phenomenon to a weather anomaly, likely the result of unusual cloud or lighting conditions. This explanation satisfied skeptics, but left witnesses frustrated. They knew what they had seen, and it had not been a trick of light or weather. The FAA's refusal to investigate further only deepened the mystery, reinforcing the idea that official channels preferred to minimize such incidents rather than confront them directly. The media's role was equally complex. While some outlets reported the story with curiosity and respect, others framed it as entertainment, treating it as a quirky diversion rather than a serious aviation mystery. Late-night talk shows joked about it. Comedians played with the idea of aliens at O'Hare, and the word UFO became once again a source of amusement rather than inquiry. Yet, beneath the humor was something more substantial. For the first time in years, a major UFO case was being discussed openly on a national scale, and it had the added weight of credible witnesses and a major airport as its setting. For researchers and members of the public interested in UFO phenomena, the O'Hare incident marked an important shift. It demonstrated that even in the modern era, long after the close of Project Blue Book and decades after the cultural peak of UFO lore, serious sightings were still happening, and they were still being swept aside by official explanations. The contrast between the calm, consistent testimonies of the witnesses and the FAA's quick dismissal highlighted a gap that has always existed, the space between what people see and what institutions are willing to acknowledge. In that sense, the government and media response to O'Hare followed a familiar script, one that had been rehearsed for decades. Witnesses saw something extraordinary, officials explained it away, the public was left caught between intrigue and skepticism. Yet because this event took place in such a visible, monitored, and important location, the story refused to disappear entirely. The mystery of O'Hare lingered in headlines, in online discussions, and in the quiet frustration of those who had looked up that day and seen something they could not forget. Whenever a story like the O'Hare sighting emerges, the first question asked is almost always the same. What could it have been, really? Skeptics, scientists, and aviation experts alike began to offer explanations, each attempting to ground the strange disk in something familiar, something that fit within the known boundaries of weather, technology, or human error. The most common explanation suggested by the FAA was that the object had been a weather anomaly, perhaps a trick of the light reflecting off a low cloud layer, or a quirk in atmospheric conditions that made a hole appear in the clouds. Chicago in November often produces unusual weather patterns, and temperature inversions can sometimes cause strange optical illusions. To officials, this was the simplest explanation, and perhaps the most comforting. Yet those who were present at O'Hare that day rejected this theory. The mechanics and pilots who reported the object insisted that it had not been a vague shimmer or fleeting reflection, but a solid, metallic disk. They emphasized the clarity of its outline, the way it hovered without movement, and the dramatic vertical ascent that left a sharply defined hole in the clouds. Weather anomalies, they argued, did not create solid shapes that hovered for minutes and then accelerated straight upward at impossible speeds. For these witnesses, dismissing the event as an atmospheric trick felt like an insult to their professionalism and their powers of observation. Another theory proposed was that the object might have been a balloon or drone. Balloons, after all, are sometimes mistaken for UFOs, especially when seen against cloudy skies. But skeptics soon ran into difficulties with this idea. Balloons drift with the wind, they do not hover with absolute stillness, and they do not suddenly shoot upward fast enough to leave a visible hole in dense clouds. Drones, while increasingly common today, were far less advanced in 2006, especially in terms of hovering silently for extended periods or climbing vertically at extraordinary speeds. The technology available at the time simply did not match the descriptions given by multiple credible witnesses. Other rational explanations circulated as well. Could it have been a secret military aircraft being tested? Could it have been an optical illusion caused by multiple reflections of airport lights against low clouds? Each idea was examined carefully, but each seemed to fall short of explaining the consistency of eyewitness testimonies. Secret military projects usually avoid highly trafficked airspaces like O'Hare, and optical illusions do not usually lead to dozens of people describing the same structured, metallic craft in nearly identical terms. The more investigators tried to pin the event on something ordinary, the more extraordinary it seemed to become. For those open to less conventional possibilities, the O'Hare incident raised the familiar specter of extraterrestrial visitation. The disk shape, the silent hovering, and the sudden vertical departure all fit the classic profile of unidentified flying objects reported throughout history. Others suggested more exotic theories, that the object could have been interdimensional in nature, or a form of technology so advanced it defied current understanding. While such ideas remain speculative, they resonate with the details that defy conventional explanation. In the absence of a clear answer, the mystery allows room for imagination to wander. What makes the O'Hare case especially compelling is not that one explanation has triumphed over others, but that all conventional explanations struggle to fully account for what happened. Theories abound, but certainty remains elusive. The event sits uneasily between the rational and the unknown, a story that resists neat categorization. For those trying to fall asleep with this story in mind, it is precisely this ambiguity, the sense of something seen clearly yet never fully explained, that lingers in the imagination. O'Hare's strange disk was either something ordinary dressed in mystery, or something extraordinary hiding in plain sight. Either way, it remains one of the most stubbornly unresolved puzzles in modern aviation history. The O'Hare sighting did more than unsettle those who looked up that November afternoon. In the months and years that followed, it began to ripple outward into culture, conversation, and even policy. Unlike fleeting local stories, this one took root because of where it happened and who reported it. A major international airport, staffed by disciplined professionals, was not the usual setting for UFO tales, and that difference made people pay attention. For researchers, journalists, and everyday listeners, the O'Hare case stood out as a moment when the extraordinary stepped into the heart of the ordinary world. Within the aviation community, the incident fueled quiet but ongoing discussions. Pilots and ground crews across the country were reminded of the stigma surrounding UFO reports. Many had seen strange things in the skies before, but the O'Hare story highlighted the risks of speaking out. If employees at one of the busiest airports in America could hesitate to file official reports, what did that say about countless other sightings that likely went unspoken? In that way, the O'Hare case became a reference point, not only as an example of an unexplained event, but also as proof of the cultural silence that surrounds such phenomena. For the broader public, the story arrived at an interesting cultural moment. By the mid-2000s, interest in UFOs had dipped compared to the great waves of fascination in the 1950s or 1970s. Skepticism was high, and the subject was often treated as entertainment rather than serious inquiry. Yet the O'Hare sighting, with its clear details and credible witnesses, reopened the conversation. Online forums filled with debate. Talk radio hosts discussed the Tribune article with a mix of intrigue and amusement. For many younger listeners, it was their first encounter with a UFO case that wasn't tied to distant decades, but to their own present day. The case also planted seeds that would later grow as government transparency on UFOs slowly shifted in the 2010s and 2020s. When the U.S. Department of Defense began acknowledging unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, in official reports, many researchers pointed back to O'Hare as a modern case that deserved re-evaluation. It became part of the lineage, leading to congressional hearings, Pentagon reports, and renewed mainstream attention on unexplained aerial events. While the O'Hare incident itself remained unresolved, its credibility gave it staying power, ensuring it would not fade entirely into obscurity. Culturally, it also found its way into documentaries, books, and television programs exploring UFO mysteries. It was retold not with the wild exaggeration of urban legends, but with the careful tone of one of the most reliable sightings of its kind. The story carried with it a sense of grounded realism, which made it a favorite for researchers who wanted to demonstrate that not all UFO cases were stories from rural highways or isolated farms. Sometimes, they happened in the most controlled environments we have, under the watchful eyes of professionals, amid the routine hum of modern life. And for the ordinary listener, the person drifting to sleep while hearing this story, the cultural ripple carries another meaning. The O'Hare sighting reminds us that mystery can touch us anywhere, even in the most familiar of places. We do not need to venture to remote mountaintops or lonely deserts to find the unknown. Sometimes, it comes to us, hovering silently above our airports, vanishing into clouds, leaving behind questions that linger long after the headlines fade. In this way, the O'Hare incident became more than an isolated event. It became a symbol of how wonder and uncertainty continue to live quietly within the fabric of everyday life. In the years following the O'Hare incident, curiosity did not fade away. If anything, it grew stronger. The initial reporting in the Chicago Tribune had given the case national visibility, and researchers who specialized in UFO phenomena were quick to pursue every possible lead. One of the main tools they used was the Freedom of Information Act, commonly known as FOIA. Through this process, investigators requested government records, hoping to uncover official acknowledgments of the sighting, or, at the very least, internal communications that might confirm it had been taken seriously behind the scenes. What came back was revealing in its own way. FAA documents did acknowledge that reports had been made by United Airlines employees on November 7, 2006. However, these reports were consistently minimized, often described as second-hand accounts or attributed to weather effects. In some cases, officials suggested that no radar anomalies were detected that day, and thus no real investigation was warranted. For many researchers, this raised more questions than it answered. Why were so many credible witnesses describing a structured craft, while the official record treated it as little more than a misunderstanding of clouds? The gap between what the public saw and what the records said seemed too wide to be coincidental. Independent researchers began to dig deeper. They interviewed witnesses directly, collecting testimonies that mirrored the original accounts, but added layers of personal detail. Some aviation enthusiasts attempted to cross-reference flight logs and weather data to test the FAA's explanation. Radar data from that time period was requested, though often it was incomplete or unavailable. Each effort seemed to confirm the same conclusion. While there was no smoking gun in the official documents, the consistency of the eyewitness reports stood on its own. The more that researchers compared notes, the harder it became to dismiss the sighting outright. The National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena, NARCAP, a respected independent group that studies unexplained aerial events, took a special interest in the O'Hare case. They produced detailed analyses of the event, treating it not as a fringe story, but as a matter of aviation safety. Their reports argued that unidentified aerial phenomena should not be ignored or dismissed, because even if they were not extraterrestrial, they still represented something unaccounted for in controlled airspace. A hovering disk above one of the world's busiest airports, they argued, was not merely a curiosity, it was a potential hazard that deserved investigation. Over time, the O'Hare incident became a case study cited in broader conversations about UAPs. When the U.S. Navy began releasing videos of unexplained aerial encounters in the late 2010s, and when Congress held hearings in the early 2020s, researchers often pointed back to O'Hare as an example of why these reports matter. If a disk could hover unnoticed by radar over Chicago in 2006, what else might be moving through the skies today, unacknowledged or unexplained? The case, though unresolved, became part of the foundation for renewed calls for government transparency. For listeners drifting into rest, the calm persistence of these investigations is part of the mystery's power. The O'Hare sighting was not forgotten because it refused to fit neatly into official explanations. It survived because witnesses held on to their memories, because researchers refused to let go, and because the truth remained just beyond reach. In the quiet space between official denial and personal testimony, the story continues to live, echoing with the possibility that what happened above Gate C-17 was more than a trick of the weather, more than a mistake of the eye. It was, and remains, an unanswered question written across the winter sky. The O'Hare incident remains suspended in a space between belief and doubt, a story that neither fades away nor resolves itself. For those who witnessed it, the memory is etched into the routine of an otherwise ordinary day, a sudden rupture in normalcy that refused to be forgotten. For researchers and the curious public, it stands as one of the most credible and puzzling cases of the modern era, an event backed not by rumor or shadowy anecdotes, but by multiple consistent testimonies from aviation professionals. And yet, for all its strength, it remains a mystery without closure, a question that lingers in the quiet of unanswered skies. What makes this case particularly compelling is its balance of the ordinary and the extraordinary. The location, a major airport, anchors it in a place of structure, rules, and constant monitoring. This is not the wilderness, where strange lights might be mistaken for stars or reflections. This is a hub of global travel, where technology, training, and human vigilance overlap. The fact that something could appear there, silently hover, and then vanish without official recognition challenges our sense of security in controlled airspace. It suggests that our understanding of the skies is not as complete as we like to believe. Psychologists who study eyewitness memory have noted how strange encounters can leave deep imprints, even when official narratives push back against them. At O'Hare, the witnesses' descriptions were strikingly consistent, a sign that this was not a case of imaginative embellishment, but of shared experience. Their frustration at not being believed reflects a broader human pattern. When mystery collides with authority, the human voice is often drowned out. Yet it is in those quiet testimonies, told and retold over the years, that the heart of the O'Hare mystery continues to beat. For skeptics, the case is a reminder of how easily extraordinary events can be explained away, or at least, how institutions try to explain them away. Weather phenomena, ice crystals, reflections, these are the common threads woven into nearly every official dismissal of UFO sightings. And yet, no scientific explanation offered for O'Hare fully matches the details reported by trained observers. This tension, between plausible denial and persistent doubt, is part of why the case endures. It refuses to collapse neatly into either category of belief or disbelief. As time moves forward, the O'Hare sighting has grown into more than an isolated event. It has become symbolic of the broader human relationship with mystery. We live in an age where data and information are abundant, where technology promises clarity, and yet the unknown still finds its way through. The sighting above Gate C-17 whispers of possibilities that remain outside our grasp. Whether one interprets it as advanced technology, an atmospheric anomaly, or something beyond Earth itself, it reminds us that mystery is not gone from the world. It lingers above us, as silent and fleeting as the disk that carved a hole in the clouds before slipping away. And so, as we close this chapter of reflection, we are left not with answers, but with an atmosphere of wonder. The O'Hare incident is not a story of resolution. It is a story of questions. Questions about what we see, what we choose to believe, and what may still exist beyond the borders of our understanding. For the restless mind seeking rest, it offers both calm and curiosity, the comfort of knowing that mystery is still alive, and the gentle invitation to drift into dreams where the unexplained is free to unfold. As the story of the strange lights above O'Hare comes to a close, we are left with a sense of quiet wonder that resists being fully explained. Unlike tales wrapped neatly with conclusions, this one drifts into the soft space of the unknown, inviting us to rest within its unanswered questions. Perhaps that is its greatest gift, not certainty, not proof, but the reminder that even in our carefully ordered world, mystery remains. In the steady rhythm of airports and airplanes, radar and routine, something slipped through that could not be measured or contained, and then it was gone, leaving only whispers and memories in its place. For the listener, this story becomes more than history or investigation. It is a gentle meditation on the vastness of the skies above and the limits of human knowledge. We spend so much of our days surrounded by schedules, explanations, and the illusion of complete understanding. Yet every now and then, an event like the O'Hare sighting reminds us that there are still horizons we cannot reach, still questions we cannot answer. That thought, far from unsettling, can be comforting. It means the world is still full of wonder, still carrying secrets waiting to be discovered. As you rest, you might picture those clouds over Chicago in the fading light of November, pierced for only a moment by a disk of silence and mystery. You might imagine the awe of the ground crew, the confusion of travelers, The quiet conversations that lingered long after the sighting faded into the gray sky. That moment, though brief, became part of a larger story. A story that now travels with you, carried gently into the quiet corners of night. And in this calm reflection, as your thoughts slow and your breathing steadies, you can allow yourself to drift. Let the unanswered questions settle softly, like snow on the runway. Let the idea of mystery guide you into sleep, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a companion to rest beside. For in mystery, there is both peace and possibility. The skies above us hold stories we cannot yet explain, and perhaps that is as it should be. So now, as this story fades, let your eyes grow heavy, your body relax deeper into stillness, and your mind release its grip. The strange lights above O'Hare will remain, untouched by final answers, suspended in memory and imagination. And you too can rest now, carried gently by the same sense of wonder, into dreams, where the unknown is no longer something to fear, but something to embrace. Drift there, peacefully, with the knowledge that mystery is always waiting, just beyond the clouds.